Chapter 3. Luke Stevenson. Razelle folded her arms across her chest at his probing question. Her brows puckered as she stared undaunted at the tall, broad-shouldered man in front of her. The fact that he'd stuttered as he said her name didn't bother her. She found it refreshing that this handsome man, with all his connections, money, and influence, had at least one flaw. When she'd first met Luke at her friend Rory's wedding, she'd been attracted to him and a little overwhelmed by the Stevenson family. His mother was so kind, his grandparents were fun, and it seemed all 5 brothers had won the genetics lottery with their handsome good looks. It was the kind of family she'd always dreamed of being a part of ever since she was a little girl. For as far back as she could remember, it had only ever been her mother and her. Once in a while she had vague night dreams of being a small child cuddled by a mother who smelled like an herb garden and being tossed in the air by a father who loved to play with her. She assumed she had these dreams because of her deep longing for a family to love. That day when she met the Stevenson family at her friend Rory's wedding, it had reminded her of what she didn't have. It was just her mother and her. The two of them were all the family she had. But she wouldn't dare bring it up with her mother. She knew better. Roz knew her mother would get angry if she found out there was something about their relationship that made her daughter unhappy. Still, Razelle couldn't help but feel a little sad about it. If she were honest with herself, it was seeing Luke Stevenson again that reminded her of the perfect family she longed for, and it poked at the missing pieces in her life. Seeing him again yesterday and tonight annoyed her more than anything. At least she tried to convince herself of that. Razelle was concerned about the fact that she couldn't stop thinking about him. It worried her more than a little. Luke stepped closer, and all of a sudden she became very aware that she was staring at him. His jawline was set in determination as he waited for her answer. Frustrated by his probing questions, she boldly turned it back around on him. "Well, I could ask you the same thing, Luke." Unexpectedly, a grin turned up the corners of his mouth. Razelle had the feeling that Luke liked it when she spoke her mind. At the moment, she didn't want to do anything to please Luke Stevenson. He cocked his head to the side as he stared at her a moment longer before he spoke. "Fair enough." He turned to his friend for a moment before focusing on her once again. "We're looking for someone. I overheard you two talking about some new guy who arrived at the camp." Razelle tore her eyes away from his and began to step away. "You shouldn't be listening in on other people's conversations." Her voice wobbled with weariness, and if she were honest, fear. It wasn't just that she was afraid of getting in trouble with her mother, although that fear was very real. If she were honest, the much bigger worry would be if she allowed herself to get close to this man. She found herself attracted to Luke, and her protective instincts set off alarm bells in her head, warning, "Danger, danger." Anxiety knifed through her belly, and suddenly she felt a desperate need to escape. "Sorry, Luke, I really need to go." "Wait, Razelle." Luke once again stepped in front of her. "All I'm asking for is a couple minutes of your time." Her friend Al stepped toward them, looking at her and then at Luke. The teenage girl huddled close to Razelle. "Do you know him?" Cassie looked over at Razelle. "Yes, I do. This is Luke. His brother is married to my friend Rory." She looked over Luke's shoulder to the man standing behind him. "This is a friend of mine." Luke turned quickly to Hudson before his gaze landed on the blonde-haired woman. "I'm Hudson." He shook hands with each of the ladies. "And I'm Cassie, Roz's friend. This is Addie." The dark-haired woman nodded at the teenager before turning back to Hudson. "You said you were looking for someone?" Hudson's brows puckered in worry. "It's my brother. He left his apartment a few days ago, and I haven't seen him since. Not sure where he is, and this is one of the last places I can think of where I might find him." Razelle sighed heavily. She could hear the worry in Hudson's voice, and her heart went out to him. Roz knew she wouldn't be able to leave until she brought him to see the man that was sick. Maybe he was Hudson's brother. "All right, I'll take you to him, but then I really must go." "Follow me and keep as quiet as you can." Roz began walking up the gentle slope of the creek bank. Cassie and Addie followed closely, and the men weren't far behind. The rest of the camp was asleep, and she really hoped to keep it that way. at least until Luke and his friend left. Roz had the feeling her compassion for people who were hurt, sick, or in trouble would land her in hot water someday. She only hoped that today wouldn't be that day. Looking around furtively, she saw no one was up and about yet. As she walked silently toward the run-down wood cabin where the man lay sick, she motioned for the others to follow. Thunder rumbled in the sky above, and she looked up to see dark clouds forming. She shivered. Ducking under some trees, she stepped under the wooded area that led to the cabin. The scent of burning wood wafted up her nose. Thin layers of smoke arose from the wood-burning barrel near the door. The scent of campfire triggered a pleasant memory, but it was hazy. She shook it off and opened the wobbly door slowly. Razelle feared any extra noise would alert Sloane and his men, so she put a finger to her lips, signaling for everyone to stay quiet. This old cabin was a good size for 1 or 2 people and supplies, but it felt cramped with all of them. Razelle had used this run-down building when she had come to the camp the first time one of the children was sick. That had been about a year ago now. Her friend Cassie had asked Roz to go with her to the camp to bring food. On one of her earlier visits, Roz had organized a few supplies on the one side of the room for easier access. Walking softly across the room, she stopped next to the man who lay in the cot near the back wall. His auburn curls lay damp on his forehead, and his head turned back and forth in his feverish state. Moisture beaded his skin and trickled down to his neck. With a gentle movement of her hand, she pushed back the wavy auburn hair that was so similar to her own. With the inside of her wrist, she touched the sick man's forehead. "He's still too hot." She dipped a clean cloth into the cold water she kept nearby. As she placed the cool cloth on his forehead, she thought of the many times she had helped her mother to heal during one of her severe headache episodes. All those years of learning about different herbal remedies, and even some nursing courses online with her mother, were now being put to good use. She was grateful to be able to help in some small way. Feet shuffled behind her, and she turned. "That's my brother," Hudson whispered as he crept closer to the bed and laid his hand on top of Wayland's. Roz was touched by the care he showed for his brother. "What's his name?" "Wayland. He's my younger brother." Razelle absorbed this information and sighed. I was afraid of that. She hadn't wanted the sick man to be Hudson's brother. A chill spread up her spine at the thought of them staying at the camp. "What's wrong with him?" "It might just be a bad case of the flu. I'm not sure." Roz cooled his forehead. "What your brother really needs to do is to go to the hospital, but sometimes it can be difficult to convince Sloane to let people leave the camp once they get here." "Just who is Sloane?" Luke questioned, a furrow forming between his brows as he stepped closer to the bed. "He's the leader of this camp. Everyone does what Sloane says or lives to regret it." Razelle spoke in hushed whispers as she mixed some herbs together to help calm Hudson's brother and help him sleep. "Well, Sloane's just going to have to accept it. We're taking him to the hospital," Luke stated in a no-nonsense tone that brooked no argument. Razelle just shrugged and nodded. It would be for the best. Her experience with Sloane told her they'd better hurry. "But if you're going to take him, you should go now before the whole camp wakes up, and Sloane and his thugs are alerted to the fact that you're here." Luke started to walk forward. "Let's do it then. The sooner we leave, the better." Razelle wrapped the shivering man in more blankets. Cassie opened the door, and Abby stood by her side. Luke and Hudson carried Wayland through the door. They had just begun to step past the trees when suddenly a voice boomed out, breaking the silence of the morning. "Who are you, and where do you think you're going with that man?" Sloane's rough voice called out. Razelle could see him limping through the trees. His 2 bodyguards were at his side until he finally came to a stop. They stood in front of Luke and Hudson, blocking their path. Sweat glistened on Sloane's forehead, and his face was as red as the glow from the rising sun behind him. Hudson replied with an even tone. "This man is my brother." Luke nodded at Hudson. "We're taking him to the hospital so that the doctors can figure out what's wrong with him." Sloane's eyes narrowed at Luke, and he nodded at the men who stood beside him. "No, I'm afraid I can't let you do that." Luke took a step forward, but Sloane's men raised rifles they carried at their side and aimed them at Luke and Hudson. Razelle gasped. What was Sloane doing? He was taking his protectiveness over the people at the camp much too far. You're seriously going to stop us from getting this man the help he needs? Luke shook his head, and Roz could see a tic forming along his jawline. Yes, I am. You're on my turf now, and what I say goes. Sloane crossed his arms across his chest. But my brother is really sick and needs... Hudson's brows puckered in worry and was about to say something more when Sloane interrupted. Razelle could see the vein in Sloane's neck throbbing and his face twisted in its angry state. No, your brother will stay here, like I said. She needed to do something to stop this situation from getting out of hand. Razelle spoke up from her place by the doorway. She began walking down the steps. Sloane, this man is really sick. I don't know what else I can do to help him. Can't you see he needs to be in the hospital? All I see is that you and these two strangers are trying to carry this man, my guest, away sudden-like, and without my say-so. Sloane crossed his arms over his chest, his stance defensive and determined. Sloane, do you want him to die? That might happen, you know. You want that on your conscience? Razelle knew she was pushing any goodwill she might have had with Sloane for fixing his leg a month ago, but she needed to try to talk some sense into him. Sloane shrugged. He won't die, because you all will stay here and take care of him. Razelle expelled a frustrated sigh. You know I can't stay. My mother expects me home this morning to help her with a café. Sloane nodded to his men to stay where they were, and he began to walk towards her. He looked at her and then switched his gaze and took a long look at Addie. Walking toward the teenager, he pulled her close to his side. Addie tried to step away, but Sloane wouldn't let her escape. Well then, Roz, you can go home, but everyone else stays. Sloane looked down at the teenager before looking over at Razelle, a menacing smile on his face. Besides, I have the perfect insurance to make sure you come back. Sloane looked down at Addie, who was pressed against his side. Don't worry, I'll keep her nice and safe in the cabin to make sure you come back. Addie's brown eyes grew large with fear and her face white with tension. Razelle stepped closer to Sloane. Maybe she could talk some sense into him. Sloane, you don't have to do this. I promise I will be back tomorrow night. Razelle was worried for Addie. The cabin was a small, run-down building where Sloane kept people at the camp, who he wanted locked away in isolation. She was scared Addie would go out of her mind there. Yes, you will come back tomorrow night, Razelle. There was steel in Sloane's eyes and a determination in his tone, but Razelle was sure she glimpsed fear in his eyes. For a moment, she wondered if there was more that the camp leader was hiding, something or someone that he was afraid of. Without warning, another crack of thunder opened up the heavens overhead, and rain began to soak them. All of you get inside the cabin, Sloane ordered, and his henchmen pointed their rifles at Luke and Hudson, who turned back and carried Hudson's brother back into the cabin. Razelle was about to follow them when Sloane called out, Don't you have somewhere to be, Razelle? Razelle nodded slowly and looked first at Addie with what she hoped was a hopeful smile. Turning, she looked over the doorway of the cabin. Luke nodded and tossed her a crooked smile. Razelle hesitated a moment. She had the feeling Luke was trying to help lessen her worry. She gave him a slight smile and nodded before hurrying down the path toward the river. As she got in her small paddle boat and rowed to the other side of the creek, troubled thoughts followed her. She couldn't help but worry over Addie, who would now be in lockdown in that cabin alone. A new wave of guilt washed over her as Razelle remembered it was her fault, because she had led Addie into danger with Sloane. She also worried over Hudson's brother, who was very sick. Razelle had taught Cassie much of what she'd learned, but she was concerned that without going to the hospital, Waylon might be in trouble. Luke and Hudson would help, but she was afraid they might try something stupid like leaving the camp. That might make things worse for all her friends at the camp. Razelle parked the old rowboat on the creek bank and hurried up the small hill and down the path that led towards home. She prayed that Mother would still be sleeping when she got home. If not, she would be in real trouble. Razelle, wake up now. You slept in again. A hand shook her shoulders and her mother's stern voice called her name, stirring her out of a deep sleep. Her brain felt fuzzy. Opening her eyes wide, Razelle panicked at her mother's angry brown eyes hovering over her. Pushing herself to sit up in bed, Razelle rubbed her eyes, quickly reaching out towards her nightstand to turn her alarm off. Her mother stood beside her bed, her arms crossed in front of her chest, and a thin line around her mouth. Roz could tell she was angry. "Sorry, Mother. I'll do my best not to sleep in again." "This is the second time in a month, Razelle. If you've been staying up late reading again, you need to stop. I have enough to do without needing to get you up in the morning." Her mother looked around the small bedroom before her gaze fell back to her daughter. "Now hurry up and get dressed. I need you to get started before our regulars show up." "Of course, Mother. I'll be downstairs right away." Razelle expelled a slow breath as her mother left her bedroom. She got out of her narrow bed and cringed when her feet landed on the cold tile floor. She hurried over to her tiny closet and pulled on her gray work shirt. Her mother told her the first time they moved to Paradise Lake, when she was 7, that she planned to save enough money so they would have a place of their own. They had lived in a few of the small towns in this state for years, before finally moving back and settling in Paradise Lake. Razelle had been happy that they settled here. She had been lucky that her mother had allowed her to keep her friendship with Rory and Cassie the whole time they moved from place to place. But Razelle longed for a permanent home where they didn't need to pack up and move all the time. And she especially liked being back in this small town, living near her friends. She didn't mind working in the coffee shop with her mother, but she longed for more freedom. When she was small, they lived in Morea Island. Razelle had spoken mostly in French, and she needed to switch to English when they moved back to Washington State. Her mother told her when she was a baby they lived in Texas, but her mother insisted that it was a backwoods town and they needed to move. So they moved across the ocean to the French Polynesian Islands. When they moved back to the States, it had taken Razelle a few months before she was comfortable speaking English once again. She'd been happy to make new friends here in Paradise Lake. Rory and Cassie were the kind of friends that were always there for her. She would do anything to help them as well. She adored her friends, which was why she was worried about Cassie and Addie being at the camp. Slipping on her black work jeans and matching black shoes, she went to her narrow dresser. She brushed back long wavy hair that fell to her knees until it was free of knots. Quickly she made 2 braids and wrapped them around her head in a crown. Taking one last look in the small cracked mirror on her dresser, she saw the dark circles under her eyes and hoped her mother wouldn't be looking too closely at her face today. Razelle didn't want her to find out she had disobeyed the rules. After feeding their fuzzy cat, Razelle opened the door of their apartment and hurried down the back stairs that led to the coffee shop. It was early morning, so no customers were there yet. Their short-order cook, Miguel, was already mixing the pancake batter. Their coffee shop also served simple breakfast foods and lunch and supper meals, so he was here early every day. They had another cook that took over the afternoon shift. "Hey, Miguel." Razelle found her apron from the peg behind the door and tied it around her waist. "You're here early." "Yep, didn't sleep so good last night. I wanted to get an early start today." Miguel turned to her, a pucker forming between his brows. "You look very tired yourself, little one. You were not sleeping well, either?" "I guess you could say that. Maybe I can catch a few winks during my lunch break." Razelle tossed him a half grin. "Maybe, but most likely your mother will ask you to do something else during your lunchtime." Miguel stirred the batter, his gaze steady on hers. Roz expelled a long breath. "Sadly, I'm sure you're right." Miguel knew how her mother worked, and it was true. She was always asking Roz to do something. There was hardly any time she could call her own. "Well, I'll need to try and get the sleep I need tonight, then." "Uh-huh." Miguel shook his head at her in doubt. Razelle sighed heavily, realizing she wouldn't be able to catch up on sleep tonight either. She was needed at the camp. Taking out the grounds of coffee, she went to the different coffee makers they had lined up behind the counter. She filled each with water and then added the coffee grounds and turned on each machine. Grabbing the bowls of coffee flavorings and toppings out of the fridge, she placed them beside the coffee machines on the counter. Checking the time, she realized that she only had a few minutes before their regular customers showed up. Razelle added the batter to the mixing bowl and started the muffins just as her mother walked in. "Razelle, you need to wipe down the tables again. There are streaks. After you have the muffins in the oven, I'd like you to get started on that." "Of course, Mother." Roz looked up at her and forced a smile to hide any disappointment. Her mother never seemed to appreciate anything she did. Somehow, whatever she did was never good enough. "See that you do." Mother left the kitchen to serve the first customers that came in the early morning. Amid the smell of coffee and the chatter of people, Razelle finished baking the first batch of muffins. She placed them on the countertop where they displayed the fresh baked goods. By mid-morning, she had made 3 batches of muffins, banana bread, and had cleaned the counters and tables and was ready for her coffee break. Her mother was busy talking with customers when it was time for her break, so Razelle went to sit outside to rest for a moment. Their small-town street was busy with neighbors calling out to each other in greeting and townspeople walking down the sidewalks. It was a sunny day, and Razelle loved to watch the people. She saw a woman walking beside her husband. The man held a toddler in one arm and had his other arm around his wife. The way the man looked at the woman was filled with so much love. They were laughing, smiling, and enjoying life together. Razelle yearned to be part of a loving family. She was so weary of working in the coffee shop and only getting away from their little apartment when Mother gave her permission. Cassie thought her mother had too much control over her life. Razelle agreed, but she didn't know if she had the courage to leave. So for now, she would stay with her mother. Maybe someday she would go out on her own. And tonight she would be back at the camp. She hoped Addie, Cassie, Luke, and Hudson and his brother were all okay. She intended to do everything she could so that they were safe. Together they would figure out a way to get away from Sloane without getting hurt. Maybe they could put their heads together and figure out a plan tonight.